Hello and welcome to another Tri Mechanics podcast. I've come down to Simon's house again. We are here with Simon Ward from the triathloncoach.com.
Morning, Tom.
We just say we had a lovely sunny day as we come down. So in shorts, t-shirt, enjoying the weather, which is fantastic. And today we've got another coach's conversation. I think.
Well, you know what I was going to do actually, Tom. I left the kettlebell outside there because I've been following a greasing the groove training protocol recently. So rather than having a fixed 30 or 40 minutes every 2 or 3 days for my strength training, every hour my little alarm goes off and I've got one exercise I choose for each day. I go outside, I've got the kettlebell right there, so there's no excuse. And today I'm on kettlebell snatches.
Fantastic. Well, I like a good kettlebell snatch. One of my favourite movements. I have a kettlebell in my garden for the exact same purpose. It just stays there all the time, all year round. Best thing about things like kettlebells is you can leave them outside because they're just metal. So you can actually, just sit outside and then you go out and, I do the same thing. I have a kettlebell outside. I used to have a pull-up bar, but I don't need one at the moment because I've got a plinth as I go down to my cellar that I do pull-ups on every time I go underneath it to get everything working and moving. And I have a deadlift bar set up that I just kind of, as I walk past that, do a few deadlifts, get the back activated and things.
Greasing the groove. Exactly. We could do more on that in another podcast.
So much to that, I think.
Anyway, look, I keep reading about people who are posting good results and the coaches keep going on about it's a result of hard work. Now, I have a problem with this because I know who those coaches are. I think in their mind hard work means working out hard, breathing hard, almost in that chronic cardio. Now, they can prove me wrong. I may have misinterpreted this, but if I was to take one of those people that's had that good result out on an easy ride for a couple of hours, one of our fat-burning rides, I suspect they'd come back and say, I haven't worked hard today. So, in your mind, what's hard work?
Well, I think that's it. I mean, we were chatting before about what actually is hard work. What's the point, almost? I think that's the biggest thing. At the end of the day, like the goal of training and all these things is not really to train. In that it's not, if we've got a goal at the end point of it, we're not trying to brutalise and beat up the body. We're trying to achieve something from it. No, apparently.
Really?
Not. Well, I think sometimes. So I think there is sometimes we have that kind of slightly masochistic thing as a human. I think is sometimes we want to cause ourselves discomfort so that we feel good after it.
I think we may just have lost an awful lot of triathletes there.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, that's the thing about doing things like Ironman. You think, well, actually. I mean, you think back to the experience, and yes, there's all the experience of race day, but it hurts, actually. So, whether we are just doing it for the pain, I'm not sure. But at the end of the day, I mean, that's what we've got to think about with training. And I think this idea, I've always hated the go hard or go home attitude. I hate it. I hate that attitude. I don't think it does a lot of good. And I was chatting to a really interesting guy in my studio the other day, who's an ex-para.
Yeah.
We were chatting about the fact that, so we talk about this, is my dad was in the army. And his attitude was always, taken from that is that everything comes from hard work, which is fine. I mean that's a good as I say good attitude to have. At the end of the day, I'm reading a book called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield all about creativity.
Yes.
And his idea is that creativity comes from working. You do the work and creativity appears. So it's not to say that you just sit down and do nothing. You have to work at things, but as you say, at what point does things become hard?
So you're right. There seems, and I know that there are a number of coaches that have a military background, and a lot of the motivation that we hear when we're going to circuit training classes or British military fitness, that sort of thing, is go hard or go home. No failure. DNF, death before DNF is another one. HTFU, man up. Now, those are the sorts of things that a sergeant major might say to a squaddie. And when you're in a situation where there's a chance that you might get shot at or killed or injured by somebody else who wants to kill you, you're in a war situation there. And I guess HTFU and man up is entirely relevant in those situations. Yeah. But most of the triathletes and people that we deal with, they're going to go out on the training session and probably in 100% of cases, they're all going to come back alive.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're in the special forces, there's a good chance that you or one of your team of 8 might not make it back or might not make it back in one piece. So I too, I'm not a fan of the militaristic sort of HTFU or go hard or go home.
But that means that's actually, in my view, and chatting, it's really interesting chatting to this guy who still has some involvement in it, how the attitude is changing. Because, I mean, I've got this kind of impression when you listen to, a good example is the thing about the Navy SEALs. So a guy called Kurt Parsley does sort of sleep research and was I think a SEAL himself, as a doctor, was part of the whole setup and system, still works with them. Now, their attitude used to be, it costs something like £5 million to make a SEAL. Not because of the actual cost of making the SEAL, but because of the loss of other people in the process. And the fact they have to put tens of or hundreds of people through that process to weed out. And the process is simply who can survive. You know, you do things like, and they'll go on a 5 or 6 day where they can't sleep. And this is why he's so interested in this stuff, is that it shows what happens when you don't sleep. But also what he started to notice in that we're looking at these SEALs, things like their testosterone was in their boots. You know, these are Navy SEAls.
Yeah.
They had no testosterone. You know, they all these, and they couldn't, and they were taking lots of what they call Ambien, which I think is I don't know whether it's our version of Zopiclone, which is basically a sedative that's very popular in the States. It puts you to unconscious state, doesn't put you to sleep. That's the key thing. Is that what his stuff was on about? The fact that that's the reason their testosterone was so low. Now, that was the old attitude. Obviously, it probably still is there pretty much, because obviously you've got to have some certain level of hardness, shall we say, to make it in that realm. But what they're starting to realise now is that what they're using things like sleep mask technology to get these SEALs to sleep. They're starting to become smarter about it. And that parallels with training and these athletes is that, and I see in that, I think there's, you look at the performance of athletes from the military, and they're phenomenal, really. I mean, if you look at a canvas, you've got some amazing athletes that could probably, if they had better situation, could be professional if they wanted to. Very high caliber, and that partly comes from the fact that they're used to suffering. So in races they perform because they just keep going and they keep suffering, and also the fact that obviously the being in the army and these things, you do a lot of fitness and you do a lot of that stuff as part of it.
So that's almost like when we come back to our primal man, he didn't sit around in front of his computer, he was on the go.
He moved all the time.
So, and that's where the greasing the groove thing comes in. Is you don't need to do big training sessions if you're just always doing something. If you're always active, you have a certain amount of resilience and robustness that comes from your lifestyle. So, Pete, Joss Naylor, who was the famous fell runner, was a sheep farmer in the Lake District. So he was up and down the fells all day in all weathers. Yeah. So he probably didn't need to do a lot of running, because he probably walked 15 miles up steep gradients and down, and he just
wet and be uncomfortable.
So he had that hardness of lifestyle.
Yeah.
But I've heard this and listened to talks as well and read books about the Navy SEALs and the Special Forces. They're like elite athletes. The fitness level and the mindset that they have to get past selection and then stay there in their unit is at the highest level. And they are like the elite athletes of the military. And so if you had an elite athlete, you certainly wouldn't be depriving him of sleep and food and making him go for 6 days without recovery, because you're not going to get the best performance. Now, they might have to do that. If you're doing an adventure race, you may have to survive on minimal sleep in order to perform, but you can't keep doing that ad infinitum because you'll break.
Yeah. I think that's the thing, is that, and I think what they're seeing now with the SEALs is they still do the same selection, because that's important for them, because it obviously it proves to them that they've got somebody they can rely on. But when they get that person, suddenly life very much changes. They don't do that stuff because they just don't need to, because they don't need to be, they hopefully, it might happen on the odd occasion. But the point is that the same, and I like to think about this when it comes to this kind of attitude of training, is that, and it's the same as I have with, for instance, my athletes. Some of my athletes that I've trained, for instance, like long, let's say we'll call them long, hard bike sessions, because they're hard because they're out for a long time, and they might be doing these every week. And I've never believed in that kind of training is essential for Ironman, because on a physiological basis, like metabolic basis, as we've talked about, actually going long and easy all the time every week, as an age group, as a masters athlete, should we say, over a certain age, there isn't a huge amount of evidence for the impact that has on a kind of metabolic that can't be achieved with less training, more targeted at the aerobic side of things. However, we've obviously got the idea. I mean, the psychological impact. You need, to be able to do an Ironman, you need to know you can do an Ironman. Really, otherwise, you're not only going to be bricking it going into it, but also your body might just halfway through say, do you know what, this is unusual. I'm not doing this anymore. Let's sit down and go home.
But there is an argument that if I hit you on the back of the hand with a hammer now, how many times do I need to do it to remind you that it hurts?
Exactly.
So you do one long ride for 7 or 8 hours. You go out, you see what you feel like when you get off the bike, how tight your hips are, how your back is, whether your shoulders are tight. Maybe another once or twice in the lead up to the race, but not every week, because also the recovery from those long sessions has an impact on the workouts that you can do on the subsequent days.
Exactly. It's
so
all that's missing the forest for focusing on a particular tree, isn't it?
Yeah,
That, I mean, it happens so often. Is that with these sessions? I mean, we can talk about that with those sessions, with things like VO2 max type sessions. Is I often see athletes, massively focusing on a very hard session, and the rest of the sessions suffer, and they think they've done a great thing because they've improved just ever so slightly in that one session. While actually, if they looked at their overall training load and the stimulus, it was less.
Yeah.
Because they went just a little too hard. And that's the thing, is what it comes back to, is the whole training hard and that attitude that then comes through, is that it's. I mean, I was chatting to this para. We're talking about this because he said about the fact that they have this, when he was in it, and the attrition rate is so high, and it was a case of work everyone hard. The ones that break, you can lose them. And I guess an example of this, and not to pick out particular coaches, but maybe I think the Brett Sutton attitude has always been, now this has come across as what people have been told. People that are involved in it have always kind of said, well, it's not quite like that. But I think looking back, the people and the athletes that have come out and having worked with Brett Sutton are kind of backing up that idea that, he worked people really hard. And if they were Chrissy Wellington and they survived it and they did fantastically, great. If they weren't and they started to break, then he wasn't so good. That's, and I don't, you don't want to say about kind of individual people, but I think that attitude goes to show that everyone's a bit different. Some people do need that attitude and that go hard, and their bodies are resilient and they can take it. And some people don't. And the thing about it, I think we've got to really ask the question, is what are we actually trying to do?
Well, I think one of the issues I see is that good age group athletes and the pros are on a pedestal. People look up to them. People see the training they do. They might listen to a podcast with the top age group or read about their training routine in a magazine and want to replicate that, because those are the people that they have identified as being role models for them. And so, if that's what they're doing and I want to get to that level, that's what I should be doing as well. But as you said, it's not going to work for every individual. Not everybody that's come to Leeds has been able to follow the same sort of training protocol as the Brownlees have, and some of them have ended up broken. Some of them have found their own path, which is slightly different and less voluminous in the training. But I still wonder what this definition of hard work is. I swim with a group of people, and some of them just swim hard all the time, and I wonder if they do an easy session, if they walk away from that disappointed that it's not pushed them on that particular day. But it's still hard work to spend 2k doing broken 50s working on your technique. It's hard work. It's just a different sort of hard work.
Exactly. Well, that's the thing, is that the problem with often when you do lots of hard work is you've got to think, I think about it from a brain perspective, and I think about it with running. So when it comes to running, I may not completely agree with and I don't use the term polarization with running, because of the polarized word has become slightly distorted with regards to cycling and various other aerobic side of things. However, with running, I do believe in the idea. So I do a lot of my runners, they do a lot of very, very easy running. Yeah. Now, it's so easy that they could write a book at the same time. Some of them, they're going so slowly it annoys them. That's when you're going easy enough. And I've seen I've seen Kipchoge do this. I've seen elite marathon runners running at 10 minutes a mile, really, really slow, not even barely barely moving. Now, what they were doing is what I believe, and this is the kind of where the brain comes in, is that your brain doesn't learn when it's stressed. The analogy I use for my clients in the office when we're talking about exercises, but also this type of running, is that imagine you are trying to learn to play a very simple tune on the guitar, having never played the guitar before, so it's complex enough to start off with, but you're having to do a few simple movement patterns. Now, you've got two options. You've got to learn that piece. You can either be in a completely dead silent room, or you could be in a room where there's music playing, kids running around, all this stuff going on. Now, which are you going to choose? And which is going to help you learn it better? I'm pretty sure the silent room is nice and relaxed. Whereas in the other room, someone is coming in every few minutes and going, you need to do this, you need to do this now. Now, the key thing is that second room is middle ground tempo threshold of running. Once you go over a certain point in running, your brain switches into race mode, which race mode is basically, what have we done before? How do we move normally? How do we understand best movement? And how much can we maximise this? This isn't a learning phase. We're not gaining anything new here. We are just trying to put out what we can do. And that's the key thing, is that is a race. That's the point, is that it also releases, it's the training that releases the most endorphins, the most feel-good, that tempo threshold stuff. But the key thing is that's why it's different from on the bike, is that on the bike you're locked in position, so you're not trying to necessarily learn a skill pattern. But swimming and running you are. And you need to take your brain down to almost that point where it can understand the intricacies of movement. So swimming is a great example. We all know what it's like when you really, on land you can do the high, the kind of high elbow catch, and you can really focus on that movement. The second some people get in the water, because they're stressed already, because they're in the water and they can't breathe properly, they can't control that movement at all, because the brain isn't allowing them to learn a new movement.
Right, so that's, if I give you some catch-up drills to do, and we're talking about 50 metres, and let's say you're comfortable at swimming 50 metres on a 60-second turnaround, so you get 10 to 15 seconds rest. But that's just swimming. That's just focusing on getting to the end of the length and taking some recovery. When I start adding a skill in, I really want you to be focusing on that skill, not on how fast you're swimming. And if I keep the times in there and keep a sharp turnaround, at a certain point you're going to be focusing more on trying to make the turnaround than you are on the technique. So your technique will start to falter. It's something I remember from a coach we used to have. Would give us drills, but would have a target time as well. For me, forget about the target time. Swim at a pace where it's comfortable to maintain your drill, and then just take 20 seconds rest at the end of it, whether that's means you're turning around off 60 seconds or 75 seconds, so you can focus entirely on the drill in a non-stressful situation. And then perhaps add in a few 50s where you can swim on a time and try to maintain the drill under a bit more stress, and then go back to doing the drill or a slightly more advanced form of the drill without the stress.
Well, yeah, I think that's the thing, is that and this goes back to, like, if you see elite swimmers and how they train. I mean, I've seen a lot of elite swimmers train, because when we did our coaching qualifications, we were at Loughborough Pool, and they had the Great Britain Olympic squad next to us in the next few lanes, and they did a lot of drills. They did a lot of training and easy stuff, but they did it in quite a different way. But you've got to really look to see the nuance. For one, they do a lot of drills like sculling. Now, how many age groupers do real sculling? They don't, because they look at it and they go, well, that doesn't seem to relate to actual swimming. It's also really slow. I don't really want to say it. Same as things like kicking. Really
not getting out of breath. Although kicking, if you do it properly, you're using the biggest muscles in the body.
The thing about kicking, I tell my athletes, when they're kicking, you're not trying to go forward faster, because actually that's for a swimmer, that's for a sprinter. Because actually what happens is, if they try and compete with the guy in the lane next to them to try and kick harder and faster, they often end up kicking with this horrible knee kick, because actually that pushes against the water more, makes them go a bit faster. Whereas actually I get people to just literally, when they're kicking, and they, and you watch how, as I say, like the Brownies is a good example, that long-legged kick, but they're actually trying to maintain a light flutter that keeps their legs on the water. And that's it, that, because buoyancy and rotation and aiding that position is what a kick is for most athletes, not propulsive. But it takes a mindset change, because as soon as someone starts swimming faster than they next to them, or kicking faster, they all want to keep up, and that trips their brain into stress mode again. So you get the same pattern. But also we watch these elite swimmers, and they'll use tools a lot. And they will use some of those tools, but most of them don't need them because actually.
But they use them for a purpose. That's the point.
Exactly.
They don't just swim with huge, great big paddles on.
Yeah.
To build strength. They build strength in a particular part of the stroke, and actually you can only really build strength like that if you've got the stability around the joint. And I think, again, this is where you read about a coach who prescribes a certain style of training, and therefore you pick up on that and think, so I can try that, forgetting that most of the swimmers that coach is working with have already got reasonably good technique and already got good shoulder musculature, so they're not going to be increasing the risk. So it's a risk versus reward type thing, and for most age groupers, using huge paddles is more risk than reward. And for those age groupers who insist on using pull buoys all the time, there may be a reward, but only in a certain way, and then they're losing the skill of something else.
Well, the way to think about this, so I often hear, and I've heard it so many times, about, some triathletes don't do drills anymore, all they need to do is work harder and harder. And Brett Sutton is a good example of someone that has promoted that drills, you can't do drill and all this kind of stuff now. And it's the same with running, this idea that and I say this to my athletes sometimes, they say, whether, they want to get faster. And I say, well, do you want to get faster in the next month and 2 months and get a PB and be done? Or do you want to be faster next year? It's a very different question, and it's the same as on the bike. The best way you can actually think about it is on the bike with a few people that I know, is that we've known for years, as you know, is that the more power you put out generally, the faster you're going to go. As soon as we had power meters, we realised that the fastest riders were putting out more power. That kind of makes sense. And then we realised it wasn't quite as linear as we thought it was. We saw these, and then we thought, well, it must be small guys. Small guys put out less power, but go at the same speed because their frontal area and all this stuff is smaller, and so they're just basically, and then we thought, right, well, that relationship must be linear, and then we're like, no, it's not. And then they started to realise that aerodynamics is absolutely key. It's the other half of the equation. And so you've got these riders that are training harder and harder and harder and harder, but their aerodynamics are rubbish because their position has been done. Lionel Sanders, pick someone out, is a great example of this. He went to the wind tunnel, he went to the velodrome. They found a much more aero position, but he didn't like it because he lost power. Now, had he gone away, had he said, you know what, I'm not going to race this year because my mentality doesn't like racing and losing. I'm going to come back in a year's time, and I'm going to be aero and powerful in that position because I'll have adapted to it, I'll have trained in it, I'll have got used to it. And do you know what? I'm going to not. And this is what Frodeno, people like Frodeno, have been masterful at. Frodeno doesn't put out much power. He does. He actually has a big engine, obviously, but in an Ironman, he's putting out 30, 40 plus watts less than Lionel Sanders. Yet he's taller, he's bigger, because he's so aero.
But he did have a problem with his back last year, didn't he? And I wonder whether he'd gone too aero.
Well, Frodeno.
Yeah.
There's things. There's lots of interplays, but actually, he's over the years, he's been one of. He's only putting out 280 watts apparently, which is probably 30 plus watts less than Lionel Sanders. Yet again, he's 6 foot plus. He's massive. But the thing is, he's very aero savvy. Now, the thing is, he has a massive engine. We know he's actually putting out from the numbers that have been kind of thrown around. His percentage of his FTP that he's putting out for an Ironman is lower than most people's. Lionel Sanders might be over 80%. He's putting out possibly 70, 75, lower than other people because he has the engine, doesn't need to use it. So he runs faster off it, and it's more predictable in those races. The whole point is, going back to the whole thing, is that I know some time trialists that did the same thing. They realised, and I know one guy who literally he went from being one of the best time trialists in the country, but always near there, 5th in the nationals, maybe 10th, when the pro guys turned up. But he could never compete because he's about 45, 50. Knew his power was not ever going up. He could train loads, but his power didn't go up. But he was quite aero savvy. He was an aeronautical engineer. He is an aeronautical engineer. So he went away and he said, right, well, I'm going to develop a position that is a little bit more aero, a bit more extreme, maybe less powerful now, but eventually maybe I'll get it back. And he literally, literally disappeared for a year. Comes back even faster, much faster. Because it was this long-term, it was only a year down the line. And you think, we've got this panic to every year. We've got to perform this year. Whereas actually, people like Nick Baldwin, I remember him talking about the fact that he couldn't compete as a pro because he wasn't good enough as a swimmer. He was a 55 to an hour Ironman swimmer. He went away from the sport for like a year or 2 years, came back as a 49 because he worked on his swimming skill as well as his fitness. And that's the thing is that we can only work, that's the thing is they're not necessarily, we worked on at the same time.
So when I spoke with Malcolm Brown, we talked about this, about having patience. Endurance, ironically, a lot of people that we know are training for an event that takes them 9, 10, 12, 14 hours and requires a lot of training. You don't just start training for an Ironman in a month's time. You start preparing in September, October for an event that's anywhere from May to September, right? So it's a long-term thing. And actually, to be at your best for those races takes several years of building the skills and the efficiency. And yet everybody's in a hurry to get fitter. So that's the first sort of bit of an oxymoron there, is that they're in a hurry to get fit for an event that takes a long time.
Yeah.
So and we know, as you know as a scientist, and I know from mixing with people like you, that it takes a long time for those hormonal changes to set in. The next thing is that Alan Cousins was writing the other day about how he tested people. And he says, I've tested people with identical VO2 maxes, let's say 60 millilitres per kilogram per minute, so reasonably good for an age group athlete. One of them runs a 40-minute 10K, and they're the same way. One of them runs a 40-minute 10K, one of them runs a 32-minute 10K. Why is that? It's not the engine.
Yeah.
It's the efficiency with which they run. It's the spring that they get from their calf muscles and their feet and the way they use those. It's the way their glutes interact. Yeah. It's the way they land, it's the energy that they lose or don't lose with each foot, it's the stride length, it's the flexibility around the hips, it's the way that they breathe, the way that they relax. It's all of those things that allow them to maintain a speed for longer.
Yeah.
And Matt Bottrell also talked about this, being smart. How long does it take? A good athlete that you or I know, somebody who's finishing in the top 10 in their age group, will have a reasonable functional threshold power. How long will it take them to add, let's say they've got an FTP of 280. How long is it going to take for them to add 10 watts to that? How many months of training would you think?
Well, it depends on where they're coming from.
Well, if they're already at that level and they've been training for a few years.
Yeah, it could take months. I mean, some people might not even ever get there. That's
right.
The thing, it's a long time.
So 10 watts, it could be a whole winter's training to boost that FTP up to 290, right? However, with what you've just talked about there, better aerodynamics.
Yeah, they could save it in one. They could save it in one choice of clothing.
Yep.
We've talked about there's a really interesting stuff about the new Drag to Zero suit. So if you've seen the new Drag to Zero Endura, who worked with Drag to Zero on there, so the new Endura suit, the encapsulator, is £400. That's a lot of money for a skin suit, or is it? The point is that they came out with a claim, this massive claim, when they released it about a month ago, saying that it would blow away everything that you could wear. And companies make claims like that all the time. The Giro Aerohead is a great example. Giro made a massive song and dance about the Aerohead. It was millions of seconds faster.
That's a helmet, yeah.
It's a helmet.
Yeah.
But actually, it was only that faster for Rowan Dennis in his position. For me personally, it was very slow. But they claimed it anyway. Now the thing about the skin suits, they tend to be, depending on how they're made, they can be a little bit universal. Unless the trip suits that are more personal can be very fast, but if you're not personally set up to you, it can be very slow. Whereas the Endura have always gone down the route of, what works across all angles outside. Now Endura came up with this new suit that has almost like silicone dimple things on its shoulders. And they made this outrageous
Is that like the things that the GB track guys were wearing in the Olympics?
Well, yeah.
Or Team Sky. Was it Team Sky last year?
Team Sky tried to wear them. I think they wore a Costello version with bubbles and in their skin suits. And then I think the UCI weren't happy about it and these kind of things. But what we did is, so we started with the things like trip suits that had trip seams on the shoulders and the arms. Then we went to ribs, which is in normal Enduro suits, and a suit called like the Velatech is a good example, used by a lot of time trialists. A lot of like the Roka triathlon-y type suits have now got these ribs on the shoulders, down to the forearms, because we know that ribs are more aero across all different angles. So in real world, basically. Anyway, so Endura made this, but then Endura changed the game a little bit with this new suit, is they stuck a load of silicone dimples on it. Quite different from
how much do they reckon it saves you then, wattage-wise?
Well, they were talking about things like, compared to the very best neck suit, like the Velatech, they were talking 10-15 watts
Right, but even if it was half to a third of that, that's 5 watts. Based on what we've just said, that's several months of training.
Well, that's the thing, is that these suits are paper thin. And people have always said, well, you couldn't put, well, actually, you put this suit on in transition, it might take you a minute or two, and you'll still save more time, plus also you'll save energy. That's the critical thing. The more energy, So anyway, so the long and short is, this suit had these massive claims against even the best. Normally you do like a wheel test, like Zip do a wheel test, and they compare their Uber wheel with the worst aero wheel they can find, the Mavic open thing. It's like a dog. And that's the problem. Is normally it looks amazing, but then Endura said no. This is versus the very best out there. This suit's phenomenal. No one believed it. So Cycling Weekly with Dan Bingham, who actually wears the Velotech suit, probably quite upset at this, took it to the velodrome last week and validated that those numbers were right.
Right.
That actually that Endura suit at 50k an hour, the 55 plus k an hour that he's riding at, could save him 10. I think he was so incredibly impressed that his team will probably now be using Endura if they can. So that's the point. But this is the argument is that it's not to say we should be going out and buying these things, but there's more to the picture than working harder.
Right. So in that instance, there, in order to be more aero, because we know that people go and get a bike fit, and they go, right, well, this is your aero position, but then they can't be in that aero position and put out their anywhere near their FTP because they're just too tight. It just hurts, so they have to then come and sit up after 3 or 4 minutes. So they need to work on their mobility around the shoulders, the back, the hamstrings, hip flexors to stay in that position for longer. So and if you're a triathlete, stay in that position and be able to run off it.
Yeah.
Now, in order to be able to do that, you probably need a winter of yoga and mobility every single day. That's hard work, fitting that into your life. Your heart rate's not going to be going above 100. It doesn't feel like you've challenged yourself aerobically, but to fit in half an hour's worth of mobility every single day for 6 months requires patience and resilience, doesn't it? And it's hard work, but it's in a different way. And I think also that's again is an issue, is that everybody gets locked into this idea that the only parameters that we need to push are our aerobic capacity, and that muscular strength, muscular endurance, muscular power, mobility, and then the metabolic fitness that you talked about are all facets of our fitness that we need to develop. And the only way we can get the max out of those is by having a training plan that's balanced, that doesn't exhaust us too much. And so we also need to factor in recovery there and sleep. Now, going to bed at 9 o'clock every night and getting a good 8 hours sleep, not 8 hours in bed, but 8 hours proper sleep every night is hard work. And also getting up on a Sunday morning, going out for your ride, coming back, and then spending half an hour writing down your food menu for the week, then going to the shops, then preparing your food, and then being on that every single day with your meals to make sure that when you've come back from your training, your food's ready, the right food's ready. That's hard work. And that's the reason why most people aren't very good with the nutrition, because it's too hard for them to do that and focus on the training. Now, if if all you ever focus on is the aerobic aspect and the movement part of your training, you're missing out on probably nine other areas where you can make big improvements. And so maybe there's nothing wrong with hard work. Maybe it's just that our focus on hard work is on stuff which makes us sweat and which makes us breathe deeply, and we need to shift our lens to look at other areas that are hard work.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is that I think, but then it does a little bit come back to what we're trying to achieve. At the end of the day, there are different people. So, for instance, let's take a top 8. Let's take an elite athlete. So, interestingly, I think it was Will Clark talking about how he changed coaches because he'd been doing a lot of, his previous coach had done a lot of sweet spot kind of base stuff and tempo stuff.
Hard work.
Which is hard work. But the key thing is that was long. That was setting him up for almost like an age group triathlon race, in that you come out, you ride on your own. Well, we know about the drafting, but you know what I mean. Is that you ride on your own, you ride to power, you ride a steady state. Now we know that the elite race might have been like that, but now it is definitely is.
Not even Ironman.
No, it's
not
ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, they all say that all the ones when they suddenly, as soon as they attach the power meter, they realise the first hour of Kona is 400 watts.
What I would say though is if you're somebody like Will or Tim Don in in a non-championship Ironman race where you're first out of the water and you can ride to your own, the field isn't as deep, and you're probably at the front of that field, you probably can set your own tempo. So it's probably more of an even pace there. But once you get into a championship race where there's 8 or 10 people and they're all coming out of the water together, then it's much more about getting to the front of the pack, 400 watts for 30 seconds until you've overtaken, and then settling back into your pace, and then somebody else goes past. So it's much more stochastic in its nature.
That argument, so that example. So Will said, and actually this was really clever, is that he's using Matt Butcher as a coach now. Now, Matt is a very, very clever coach from that perspective.
Yeah.
It's not about... I mean, I've heard Matt talk about lots of different things. So, interestingly, Matt talked about the fact that he's a big fan of sweet spot and tempo stuff.
He did.
Time trialist.
Yeah.
Because that's what they're after. Now, Will talks about training with Matt and instantly says that he wasn't doing that. He was doing really hard efforts. Because, obviously, Matt, as a coach, has seen the I can't never say that word.
Specificity.
That's the one. Of the sport, of his actual element of that sport was very different.
Yep.
So Will didn't need to do a lot of that stuff. He already had that ability to do that long, and if he was on his own, if he's left on his own, he's got a puncher, he knows he can tempo and sweet spot his way through the Ironman bike leg. The key thing is that it wasn't enabling him to stay in the race because of the surges were causing too much, whether it's psychological, whether the brain just goes, wow, we're not used to this, or whether it's physiological. The key thing is that dialing in, and that's a different kind of hard work. Now, Will actually said it wasn't that his new coach, Matt, made him work harder, he was more intelligent. So that comes back to the same argument of, right, now, why, what is hard work, and whether, the whole point of all of this stuff, I was about the point I was going to make actually, we talk about the aerodynamics side of things. So, how does your psychology work? Because in triathlon, you can win, i.e. perform better or do whatever you want in a million different ways. You could buy the right wetsuit that will save you minutes. By right wetsuit, I mean possibly the cheaper one. I've had a conversation with an athlete recently who he came to see me, and he was actually going to go and buy himself a Blue 70 Helix. And I said, I don't think the Helix is right for you because he's got very long legs and he doesn't kick, and he's not the strongest swimmer, particularly on his kick, and in the pool, when he does kick, he goes backwards. And I said, I'll be honest, I think if you go in a Helix, I think you'll actually go slower.
Yeah.
And that's simply because a Helix is a fantastic suit.
But it's for the right person.
Yeah. So I said, well, have a look at the Fusion, I think it was.
They're
half the price.
Yeah.
The buoyancy is designed, and also the Fusion's got really flexible shoulders now. They've made the Blue 70 have probably made a bit of a balls up, and they probably made it a bit too good, because apparently the new 2018 one has got basically the nice flexible shoulders, but the buoyant legs. Now, I'm in the same boat. I will always swim better in more buoyant legs. So I put my old Helix on, and I was almost digging into the water because my legs dropped so much. And that's the key thing, is it's about intelligence. So you can spend money carefully, and triathlon has all these different ways. Now, you can gain that 2 minutes by working harder. The key thing comes back to, so I'll use myself as an example. I've got a very bad hip. I've got two very bad hips. I can't really ride in aero position much anymore. It's probably looking at hip replacement soon. I'm probably not going to be in the sport in the way I want to do it for much longer. However, put me sat up on a particularly on my turbo that I like, or on the side of a nice mountain. I'm fantastic. I can put out all the power I want to. Now, I have a power meter indoors, and people have asked me over the last couple of years, I've had some really nasty comments that people have said, well, why are you even bothering with a power meter? You barely race. And I was like, do you know what? I like sitting indoors sometimes, looking at that power meter, or doing a session and doing it a few weeks later and going, do you know what? I've put out more power. I feel better, and it makes me think. And I go upstairs to my turbo dungeon, and I feel like I've done a really good session because my body feels like it's got stronger. Now, do I need to go out and race to prove that? I used to think yes. I used to think that was what it was all about. I used to think it was all about beating other people. I realised that I can't put out that power in aero position in the sport that I love doing, and that made me sad. It made me think, well, what's the point? I'm like the best person indoors ever, but outdoors I'm shocking. So I thought,
well, you maybe have to concede that one to Lionel, because he does a lot of indoor riding.
Exactly. Yeah. But then he took it outside and he beat everyone, and that's the thing, is that I'm almost like, do you know what? I don't want to buy aerodynamics. I was going to go for lots of testing to see if I could find an aerodynamic position that suited my funky hips. But then I thought, do you know what? I could spend £1,000 on that, of money that I don't necessarily have easily and to throw away. But also, would I feel like I gained? Would I feel like would I actually feel any better from going marginally faster, from having spent money on aerodynamics or equipment? And that's the thing, sometimes people work hard because and I know somebody who's like this, they almost actively don't want a fancy bike. They race on a steel tube bike specifically so their fitness gain is what's the difference. And everyone keeps saying to them, do you know what, if you went and bought a Cervelo P6, you'd win all this. What are you doing on that steel bike?
So that sort of almost comes round to the philosophy of training and why we're doing it. You mentioned Will Clark there, so we'll use him, but you could pick equally any number of athletes that are racing as pros. People like Will are probably able to earn a living because they're sponsored, they have a team, they have sponsorship, which amounts to more than just equipment. They can win races, so they're winning prize money. It's not an easy living. It's not, no professional sportsman is, but the rewards for triathlon for the same amount of weekly effort are substantially lower than tennis or golf, for instance. But they can earn a living from the sport they love. Then you've got your second and third tier pros that are struggling to make a living, and I'm sure that some of them are racing as a pro because it's an ego thing to say, I'm a pro. But it's a subsistence living, really, and one which requires more travelling and all of that. But then we've got your age groupers. So you've got some age groupers who can go to Kona. And is it getting to Kona? Have they got a chance of winning the World Championship? Or is it the fact that they qualify every year that drives them on? Then you've got the age groupers who are trying to set a PB. But what is a PB? Because if you go and race the Outlaw, which is essentially a flat course, then if your next race is Ironman Wales, you're probably not going to go any faster. So what's driving you then? Is it the satisfaction of finishing the race? Is it the challenge of going to the course? Is it the challenge of just fitting all of this training into your life and being a bit different from all of your work colleagues? Is it because you just like activity and and in order to do that activity you have to have a race at the end of it? Yeah. For me, I've raced. Racing for me is about my own personal challenge. It's about... I used to be, but I'm not anymore driven by time, because time doesn't sum up whether I've had a great time, a great occasion, a great experience. Because I could have the shittest race ever and have the fastest time, but I'd come away from that feeling a little flat. Equally, one of the races we talk about now is an off-road Ironman we did back in 2012, which was badly organised. They didn't even, we finished after the cut-off because the weather conditions were so bad. They didn't give us a T-shirt, but it's one of the events that we still talk about it fondly because of all the things that we had to do. There was a great deal of satisfaction, and we did it as a group, so there was a great deal of sort of camaraderie there as well. Some people I know just want to be what I call, and this is a new project of mine, Tom, which we can talk about later, is about being a high-performance human. They like to work out, but they've got a business to run and they want to be successful at that. They've got children that they're bringing up and they want to be good parents. They've got friends that they want to see regularly. They want to be able to sleep soundly at night and not look great. That's a byproduct of eating the right foods which enable them to maintain a healthy existence and avoid disease. And when I did my fitness instructor's course years ago, we talked about fitness, and fitness is the basic health and the avoidance of disease. Yeah, and the energy levels to accomplish your daily tasks with a little bit to spare for emergencies. That was the basic definition of fitness. And so coming back down to, hard work, it's hard to balance all of that stuff out, isn't it? It's not just about beating yourself up every day, hard work. It's about balancing all of that and doing it regularly. That's the hard thing, because life challenges us with so many curveballs every day that it's hard to maintain that daily existence to achieve your goals.
Yeah. Well, I remember once someone saying to me about an athlete, having seen their training, he's very disparaging comments of, he just doesn't work hard enough. That's what he said. And I was like, well, that he's got a young family, and he's actually, he might be in this category. But he's actually got a job, he's working hard, and all those things. So actually, he's doing as much training as he can do around that job, and that's what gives him the satisfaction that he feels good about himself, that he has a family, he looks after his children, he looks after his wife, all these things, he provides an income and all these bits and pieces, and then he still does a bit of training and still does really well. That's good enough for him, and it should be good enough for everyone else too, and you can't judge on that. That's not fair. And that's the thing, is that it's, as you say, it comes back to this, what is this, this whole thing about, kind of, I say, hard work. And I mean, I'm the same, is that, I want to be able to sleep well and all these bits and pieces and have all those kind of things and feel good. At the end of the day, it's all about feeling good and helping. And there's a fantastic quote. I need to get it because I'd love to be able to read it at the end of this. But it ends in that basically specialisation is for insects. And it's a very famous quote, and it basically goes through a whole list of things saying a human should be able to change a diaper, obviously very American, and do all these amazing different things, trap an animal, all these things, because we are meant to be we're meant to be adaptable to everything, and that's kind of part of the point. That's why triathlon, I think, is intriguing. And this is the thing, is that, have you ever noticed that I'm like this? So I used to ski a bit, and I got good really quickly because I pick up those type of skills quite quickly, but I got bored really quickly too, because actually I realised, well, I don't want to be a skier, but I'm good enough to be able to fly down the slope and have fun. Right, what's the next thing? All right, it's the snowboarding instead then. And then I got a bit alright at snowboarding, I could go down the slope, and then I thought, oh, what's the next thing then? And every time that, and I've always thought, my dad was like this, and I always viewed it as almost like a bad quality, of that he was a bit flighty. My dad could, he was in the army, he was a cabinet maker, he ended up being a candle maker, and ended up making candles for the Vatican City. And I was on TV a lot when I was younger, because we were always on the news, because they were doing this story about my dad who made this candle for the Vatican City out of an oil drum, He was always going on to the next thing. He never quite finished his current project, which my mum said was always the problem. But the key thing is that he had this man, we do that, don't we? We as humans, it's a very human thing to learn a skill, be good enough at it to basically go, hey, I can do this, and then we all say, and that's why triathlon is almost the most addictive sport, because people run a lot, and then they get to the point where I've done a bit of trail running, I've done different running, but it's still running. Ooh, what if I had this new skills, like swimming and biking, and it holds, and the mind is always trying to almost search for something new, and that's what we got. And that's the thing, is that you've got to play into this. You've got to work with that psychology. That you're actually trying to find out, why wants that stuff.
It is interesting though, because whilst triathletes think that they're multi-talented because they can swim, bike, and run, actually they're still quite limited, because these sports they're all going forwards. Mm-hmm. So there's no direction change. They're very one-paced, because particularly if you do longer distances, it's a very fine band of steady state to be able to keep going for 10, 12, 14 hours. So there's none of that sort of like being able to surge. There's none of that being able to go really easy, because we know they get bored as well. So there's a mental thing. They're not particularly strong. They're not particularly flexible. So there's an awful lot of skills as well. And I do think, having come from a background where I was working with rugby players and cricketers, that having some of those other skills, a bit of athleticism, a bit of hand-eye coordination, the ability to be able to touch your toes, or to do a downward dog effectively, that those things would actually make for better athletes. I do appreciate that at the very highest level, the Will Clark and the Brownlee level, you need to specialise to excel at your sport, which means excluding other stuff. So that's why when you see Mo Farah and the Brownlees on Superstars, they're not very good at gymnastics rings or the strength test, but they're very good at the endurance ones, because that's extreme specialisation. But for most age groupers, they don't need that degree of specialisation in order to still be good. And I for me now, as I've got in sort of past that super competitive thing to seeing how long I can maintain my fitness for, how long I can hold on to what I've got, can I still be healthy and do these things? It's if you said to me, right, Si, we're going off to do the struggle sportif on Sunday, and we've got a place, do you want to come? I'd be able to say, yeah, okay, I'm fit enough to know that I can do it without having to train for it. Now, I've picked up, you mentioned skiing, I've picked up the bug for skiing in the last year, and I can now go skiing with my mates. It's about going with my mates, and it's about more than just skiing and going downhill. It's about learning how to turn properly, learning how to cope with the different conditions, but also the après ski, But if they said to me now, we've got a place on the skiing side, do you want to come back and do that? So it's about having enough fitness that I can do these things without having to spend a year preparing for it, I think. That's my drive. And I like hard work, but equally I like if we could go and toot along on paddle boards without extending ourselves and just go along the canal for an hour and have a coffee and come back, and that would be equally as fun.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is that I remember having a swim coach who once said to me, he said, I'll teach you how to do, we'll show you how to a better front crawl. I'll teach you all those things. But you're going to be doing some breaststroke and you're going to be doing some swimming with your head up and all those things. And we've kind of got, quizzical look. He said, if I send you away and you can swim better in a straight line with your head down and go faster back to the pool, but in an emergency, you're out in the water and somebody needs you to, is drowning and needs you to drag them to shore and you can't do it, you failed.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is, that's the end of the day. We've got to be better humans, haven't we?
Yeah.
And that's when it comes to, so to end on the last bit, I think the last point I want to make is that when we're training, we're not trying to work harder. We're trying to show our body it can do more.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's already there. The body can do it. You just need to take away the block that's the back of your mind that says, oh God, I couldn't do that. Well, so that's what training is to do. It's taking away the block that the mind says, no, we shouldn't do that. And you take it, you show it can, and it says, all right, let's do that.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the end of the day, what we're trying to achieve.
Well, and I guess my closing point on that is I've been doing triathlon now for 30 years. I've been doing those bike intervals, the running intervals, the swimming intervals for 30 years. And what I'm doing now is trying to maintain that by doing other hard work. So I'm doing my strength work. I'm going to yoga once a week. I'm trying to meditate. It's harder for me to get prepared to do those than it is to go out and swim. So
Exactly.
Hard work in a different direction.
Exactly. Brilliant stuff. Right, I think we better go and enjoy the sun, I think.
Yeah, thanks Tom, as always. I hope this podcast one works for you this time.
Do you want to quickly, before we leave, Simon, just tell everyone where they can find you?
Yes, so you can find me by visiting my website, simonwardtriathloncoach.com. I have my own podcast, which Tom comes onto as a guest regularly, and that is the triathloncoach.com SWATcast. That comes out every Wednesday. You can probably best find it on iTunes or Podbean, and you can find me on Twitter as @triathloncoach, and I think I'm triathlon coach or the triathlon coach on Instagram as well. So visible on all of those, Tom, and
Fantastic.
Facebook, of course.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you very much. And obviously you can find us under Tri Mechanics on Twitter, on Facebook, and our website www.trimechanics.co.uk. Thank you very much, listeners, and we'll see you soon.
Okay, thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.